In the year 2000, the dramatist Edward Albee wrote a play which told the story of a renowned architect who is having an extramarital affair with a goat. The play is called The Goat. After Albee wrote it, he showed the manuscript to a number of his close friends and associates, and their advice was unanimous. Do not put this on. This play will ruin your career, it will ruin your reputation. But at the age of 72, Albee didn't scare very easily. If anything, the warnings just spurred him on. Now, this turned out pretty well for him because The Goat went on to be a critical and commercial success. It won the Tony Award for Best Play, and it was also a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. So there's a few lessons to be learnt from this. Firstly, that plays about bestiality are more popular than you'd think. But more important than that, it's that artists should always trust their instincts and should never be afraid to take risks. Because we are living in a culture of conformity brought on in part by a growing sense that to offend people's sensibilities can ruin one's career. Well, it can, but I'm of the view that if you're a true artist, you don't subordinate your artistry to commercial concerns. In other words, you don't want to be sacrificing your muse at the altar of mammon. When we think of censorship, our minds run to the draconianism of the Star Chamber, the bishop's ban of 1599, the Nazis burning books, but self-censorship can be just as damaging to the artistic health of a nation. The explosion of social media has provided a forum in which non-conformist viewpoints are often lambasted in the most public way, with artistic representation being continually scrutinised through the lens of identity politics. We live in a society in which artists are regularly attacked for sending out the wrong message. Journalists, critics, activists will often castigate artists who don't share their ideological worldview. They dismiss art that they perceive to be problematic or insufficiently diverse. They see films, books, and comedy routines even as normalising hatred or legitimising prejudice. There's a kind of pervasive literal-mindedness which means that for an artist to even depict a morally dubious character is somehow seen as an endorsement of that character's behaviour. This is why publishers now routinely employ sensitivity readers to ensure that books are unlikely to cause offence. This is Philistinism. Because morality has absolutely nothing to do with art. It isn't the role of the artist to offer moral instruction. That's called a preacher, not an artist. As Oscar Wilde said in the preface to The Picture of Dorian Gray, there is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written, that is all. Now, this is not to suggest that art cannot be political or pedagogic, but it invariably suffers when the artist is compelled in that direction against his or her will. It is likewise detrimental to our enjoyment of art if we are obliged to react from a position of moral judgment. Now, in May of this year, I wrote an article about the playwright Dennis Potter, who had chosen television as his preferred medium because he was attracted to its democratising effects. Unlike the theatre, it could cut through divisions of class, age, background. It could reach everybody. But even in this very popular medium, Potter refused to compromise. He refused to self-censor. Had he done so, he might have been better off financially, but he certainly wouldn't have left behind such an important body of work. I think the example of Dennis Potter really shows how risk-averse our creative industries have become. If you think about his most famous and important work, The Singing Detective, which everyone should see if you haven't already, for all its eccentricity and complexity, it was nonetheless given a prime-time slot on BBC One. That was in 1986, and this could never happen now. These days, something like The Singing Detective wouldn't even get commissioned. And what this means is that artists are now self-censoring in order to satisfy the demands of the decision makers. Of course, it is not in the nature of artists to admit that they are curtailing their own expression in the face of external influences, which means that the problem of self-censorship is likely to be far more widespread than we can imagine. The best artists are non-conformists, and the worst artists like to be seen as the best artists. We should do all we can to cultivate a world in which creative risks are worth taking, in which the artist will not be punished for eccentricity, innovation, and being faithful to his muse.